Imagine a government runs a power line directly to your house,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they give you your very first batch of electricity completely for free. I mean, it is the ultimate gift.
Yeah, sounds like a total game changer.
You'd think so.
Yeah.
Yet, a month later, when those free kilowatts run out, you intentionally shut the power off, you let the wires just hang dead, and you go right back to burning kerosene in the dark.
Which is just wild to think about.
Right. But in rural Kenya, this isn't some hypothetical thought experiment. It's exactly what happened during a massive state-sponsored electrification push.
It's a phenomenal paradox, really. I mean, we've treated the physical connection, the plug in the wall, the wire to the pole, as the definitive finish line for global development.
But you just flip a switch and the darkness is defeated.
Exactly. You flip the switch, and economic prosperity is just naturally supposed to follow. But when you actually look closely at the mechanics of poverty reduction, that simple narrative just collapses entirely.
Well, welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking a fierce, highly debated question that is currently dominating global energy discussions. And the question is, does simply giving a community electricity actually pull the poorest populations out of poverty?
And, we should mention the catalyst for this whole debate.
Yeah, it was a pretty deeply skeptical take from an article in The Economist.
Right. They basically argued that giving someone a light bulb does not change their life anywhere near as much as, well, as the global development community really wants to believe.
So today we are digging into the actual realities of first-time electrification. We're looking at the clash between, short-term failures and long-term dividends. And we'll explore those hidden economic barriers that basically decide if electricity transforms a community or just leaves them with a new bill they literally cannot pay.
Yeah, and to understand why The Economist took such a, skeptical stance, we have to look at the immediate, on-the-ground reality of first-time energy access.
Because it's not what people picture.
Right. Not at all. When a rural, low-income village gets connected, whether that's through a solar home system or an extension of the national grid, the resulting economic activity does not resemble some overnight industrial revolution.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is much closer to, like, a dim LED light hanging from the ceiling and a cell phone plugged into a wall.
Exactly.
Take the case of Ms. Yandarai. She's this ambitious farmer in Rwanda we read about in the sources. She grows maize, beans, bananas, and coffee.
A very diverse crop yield.
Yeah, and she acquired a basic solar kit for her home. Now, you might assume this completely revolutionizes her farming operation, but the technical limitations of that basic solar kit put a hard cap on her ambition.
Right, because a small solar panel might generate, 50 or 100 watts?
Yep, it provides light, sure, but it absolutely cannot power a compressor for a refrigerator to preserve her harvest. It can't power the heating element of an electric stove.
Well, the physics of electricity basically dictate the economics here. Heating and cooling, they demand massive amounts of wattage.
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge draw.
Right, and that requires robust, expensive grid infrastructure. So when a farmer like Miss Yandarai gets a basic, low-tier solar setup, she's really just getting enough power to charge a device, Not enough power to fundamentally alter how she produces or stores her crops.
It's like giving someone a state-of-the-art smartphone, but they live in an area with absolutely zero data coverage, and they don't have a cent to their name to buy any apps.
That is a perfect analogy.
It's a tool with this massive world-changing potential, but practically speaking, in their day-to-day life, it is basically just a very shiny calculator.
Yeah, that captures the limitation perfectly. Now, we shouldn't dismiss the value of that shiny calculator entirely, right?
Fair point.
Because what basic solar kits and low-tier grid connections do successfully is bridge the information divide.
Oh, right. Like getting access to data.
Exactly. When a farmer can charge a mobile phone at home instead of, walking 3 miles to a charging kiosk, she suddenly has constant access to market prices in the capital.
She can check weather forecasts, too.
Yeah, she can use mobile banking. She can listen to agricultural broadcasts on the radio. I mean, connectivity is a very powerful baseline.
It is. But connectivity is not the same thing as direct wealth generation. And this brings us to a massive dilemma for developing nations.
The budget problem.
Exactly. These governments are invariably cash-strapped. They're constantly weighing competing priorities. I mean, if you are a finance minister with limited funds, you have to decide, do you spend hundreds of millions extending the electrical grid to remote rural areas knowing it might just result in people charging their phone.
Right. Or do you take that same money and spend it on paving roads, building schools, or maybe subsidizing fertilizer?
Yeah, that's the core of the skeptic's argument. If the stated goal of a multi-million-dollar infrastructure project is rapid transformative poverty reduction, and then 5 years later the economic output of the village hasn't changed at all, well, the policy looks like a total failure.
Which naturally triggered a massive wave of pushback from energy advocates.
Oh yeah, they did not agree with The Economist.
No, not at all. Cross-boundary energy access actually entered this debate with a very sharp counterargument. They stated that rescuing people from poverty is a high and artificial standard against which to judge solar lamps.
That's a great quote.
Right. And they point out that measuring economic impact on a 5-year timeline is fundamentally the wrong lens for evaluating massive infrastructural shifts.
Because the time frame changes everything, right?
It really does. When you try to measure the impact of a completely new economic structure like the introduction of electricity in just 5 years, you are measuring a system that is basically still in its infancy.
You just don't see the results that fast.
Exactly. The actual measurable spike in a country's GDP doesn't happen until you see a generational shift. And that takes, 10 to 20 years to compound.
Because the immediate impacts are behavioral, not financial. I mean, think about a child who previously couldn't read after sundown. Now they can study for 3 extra hours a night under an electric light.
Which is huge for their development.
Huge. That child's test scores might improve next week, sure, but that doesn't boost the national economic output tomorrow.
Right, right.
The financial return on that light bulb only materializes a decade later when that child enters the workforce, with a higher level of education and secures a specialized higher-paying job.
Yeah, and consider the historical parallel of Italy in the 1960s.
Oh, this was a
Energy sector and pushed really aggressively for full universal electrification. The motivation was largely a social choice.
Wait, a social choice?
Yeah.
Not an economic one.
Yeah, exactly. It was about equity. It was about modernizing the rural South and uniting the country, under a shared standard of living.
Yeah.
It wasn't treated as a pure short-term return on investment play.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right, and it took decades for the economic effect of that grid to compound. But eventually, it allowed industrial manufacturing to spread everywhere, making modern Italian economic life basically unimaginable without it today.
Okay, I understand the historical precedent, but let's play devil's advocate for a second. If I am a finance minister today, and I just borrowed $50 million from the World Bank to electrify a region, I can't go to my citizens and say, check back in 2045 to see if this worked.
Yeah, that would be a tough sell.
Telling investors or taxpayers to wait 2 decades sounds dangerously close to moving the goalposts just so we don't have to admit a project has failed. How do we measure success in the interim without just crossing our fingers?
Well, you measure it through immediate social dividends that act as precursors to economic growth. We don't actually have to wait 20 years to see the value.
What kind of social dividends?
Things like health.
Huh.
The moment a household switches from a kerosene lantern to an LED bulb, you see a drastic reduction in severe respiratory illnesses.
Oh, because of the smoke.
Exactly. Burning kerosene and animal dung intervals for light and heat creates devastating air pollution. Eliminating that removes a massive burden from local healthcare clinics and, frankly, keeps adults healthy enough to work.
So you're basically swapping an immediate financial return for an immediate healthcare saving.
Yes, exactly. And add to that the safety improvements from municipal streetlights. When a village center is lit, crime drops and local markets can stay open well into the evening.
Which instantly expands trading hours.
Right. And you see rural health clinics that can suddenly refrigerate vaccines and sterilize surgical equipment. These are profound overnight transformations. They just don't map neatly onto a standard household income survey in year 3.
Yeah, so the debate really hinges on the friction between those long-term realities and the short-term study findings. Short-term, you get a healthier kid and a vaccinated population.
Which is invaluable.
Of course.
Yeah.
And long-term, you get an educated adult with a higher-paying job. But this assumes the electricity is actually being used.
Ah, yes. The usage problem.
Let's look back to that Kenyan example from the beginning of the deep dive, because time alone doesn't solve the affordability barrier.
Right, the last mile reality check.
Exactly. So the Kenyan government initiated the Last Mile program to connect low-income isolated households. And to eliminate the friction of getting started, they provided 10 free kilowatt hours of electricity.
They really tried to make it as easy as possible.
They did. They built the infrastructure, they wired the homes, they practically begged the citizens to use it, and yet The majority of households let the free power run out and then abandoned the grid entirely. They just couldn't afford the ongoing tariff.
Think about the underlying mechanics of utility economics here. An energy company spends vast amounts of capital to build out rural infrastructure.
Millions of dollars.
Easily. They have to pay for the transformers, the copper wire, the maintenance crews. To pay back that initial capital expenditure, they rely on a steady, high volume of electricity consumption.
Right.
So if the newly connected households are only running a single light bulb for 3 hours a night or dropping off the grid entirely, like in Kenya, the utility generates essentially zero revenue.
It becomes an economic death spiral for the utility company. And we see the exact same fragility in mini-grid systems, too. Take that hydro-powered mini-grid project in Zambia.
Oh, yeah, that was a tough situation.
It suffered a physical failure when the river ran dry due to drought, sure, but its economic model was doomed regardless. Mini-grids have incredibly high upfront capital costs.
Right, the equipment is not cheap.
Not at all. So to make the math work, the developers have to charge a really high tariff per kilowatt hour. But the local population in that Zambian community simply didn't have the disposable income to pay those high rates.
Which brings us to a really crucial distinction, the difference between availability and applicability. Just because electrons are available at the wall does not mean they are applicable to the local economy.
That's a great way to put it.
Energy access is really best understood through a multi-tier framework.
Yeah, I was looking at this multi-tier framework in the research, and it essentially visualizes energy access as a ladder.
Yes, exactly like a ladder.
So when a poor household first steps onto the ladder, they naturally prioritize the lowest rung basic lighting, maybe your radio, and that first rung is cheap.
Very accessible.
But the jump to the next rung appliances that actually save labor or generate income, like an electric mill, an irrigation pump, or clean cooking technology, that is a massive financial leap.
It's an impassable leap for many, and this creates a very harsh reality. Initial access to electricity can actually accelerate local inequality if it isn't paired with financial access.
Wait, accelerate inequality. How does that work?
Well, imagine you and your neighbor both get connected to the grid today. You are barely scraping by, so you only use the power for a single light bulb.
Okay, pretty standard.
But your neighbor has some savings, so he buys an electric irrigation pump. His crop yield instantly triples, and because he is producing so much more, the local market price for that crop drops.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So you are now selling your manually watered crops for less money than you did before the grid even arrived. The availability of electricity without the applicability of the pump literally made you poorer.
That is a staggering unintended consequence. It proves that just dropping off solar panels or stringing up wires is fundamentally insufficient. So if standalone infrastructure fails, how do you bridge the appliance gap?
Well, you don't just supply the power, you have to supply the factory, basically.
Right, and this is where the intervention by the Imlinda Foundation in Jharkhand, India, provides a pretty incredible blueprint.
Yeah, the Imlinda Foundation recognized that electricity without a productive use is just an economic dead end. So when they deployed solar mini-grids to tribal communities, they didn't just walk away.
They stayed involved.
They actively financed the appliances required for productive use.
Because they looked at the local agricultural output, right? Which was largely mustard seeds.
Yeah.
And selling raw mustard seeds yields a very low margin.
Very low.
But if you press those seeds into mustard oil, the value multiplies. The barrier was the labor and the machinery. So the Melinda Foundation actually financed electric mustard oil expelling machines, flour mills, and cold storage facilities.
Yeah.
They literally handed the community the means of production.
And notice the mechanism there. By financing the expelling machines, they created a new high-margin revenue stream for the farmers.
Which gives them cash.
Exactly. That new cash flow is exactly what allowed the farmers to easily pay the ongoing electricity tariff. The mini-grid becomes financially sustainable because the energy is being converted directly into capital.
It's brilliant.
They even took it a step further by establishing a brand called Survey to help these rural women package and sell their processed goods to larger, wealthier markets.
They solved the entire value chain. And the thing is, you don't always need a massive foundation to make this work, as long as the infrastructure is scaled correctly to the community.
Right. Local scaling is key.
Look at the Majiro hydroelectric plant in Kenya.
Yeah.
John Majiro didn't go out and secure millions in international funding to build some massive concrete dam. He built a microhydro plant using scrap materials, old bicycle parts, and simple motors.
The brilliance of the Majiro project is capital expenditure. Because he built it using repurposed local materials, his upfront costs were incredibly low.
So he didn't have massive debt.
Exactly. This meant he didn't have to charge a high punitive tariff to pay back investors. He could sell the power for pennies, which perfectly matched the actual purchasing power of his neighbors.
That's a perfect fit.
It provided cheap, reliable power that increased local productivity by 400%, all because the economics were actually aligned with the reality of the village.
And we also have to look at the gender dynamics of this productivity, because the impact of localized productive electricity on women is profound.
Absolutely profound.
In communities without power, women suffer deeply from time poverty. They spend hours every single day doing intense manual labor, fetching water, grinding grain by hand, gathering firewood.
Right, and when you introduce a localized water pump or an electric mill, you instantly return hours of time to those women.
Which changes everything.
It really does. And the developmental data is incredibly clear on what happens next. Women reinvest roughly 90% of their income back into their families.
90%. That's massive.
Yeah. When you empower a woman with productive electricity, you are directly funding child education, better nutrition, and family health care. The multiplier effect is just massive.
But the complexity of actually achieving that multiplier effect is daunting. I mean, it means an energy company cannot just be an energy company anymore.
Not if they want to succeed.
Right? If they want their rural grids to actually survive, they have to become microfinance institutions to fund the appliances. They have to become agricultural consultants to help farmers transition to mechanized processing. They have to become marketing firms like the Melinda Foundation did with the Sorvy brand.
It is the ultimate multidimensional puzzle. Electricity is just the catalyst, really. It's the spark. But a spark needs fuel.
Right.
If you drop a spark into an environment with no roads to move the new products, no larger markets to sell them in, and no microfinance to buy the machinery in the first place, the chain of poverty remains totally unbroken.
And even when you solve that puzzle perfectly, the environment will still throw you a curveball. When you successfully remove a barrier, you always have to watch out for the rebound effect.
Oh, yeah. The situation in Morocco is a perfect, terrifying example of this.
So Morocco executed one of the most successful rural electrification campaigns in the world. They reached over 99% access. By all traditional metrics, it was a massive triumph.
A huge win on paper.
But let's look at the mechanism of what happened next. Before the grid, farmers used diesel generators to pump groundwater for irrigation. And diesel is expensive.
It requires driving into town, buying fuel with cash, hauling it back.
Exactly. That financial friction naturally limited how much water farmers could afford to pump.
But then subsidized electricity removed that friction entirely. Suddenly, a farmer could leave an electric pump running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for a fraction of the cost of diesel.
The natural constraint was just gone. And because they could pump nonstop, it triggered a massive countrywide agricultural boom. But that boom has now led to severe, perhaps irreversible groundwater depletion.
Talk about a double-edged sword.
Right. They solved the energy scarcity problem, but the mechanism of that solution directly accelerated a devastating water scarcity problem.
Which really proves that energy access policies can never exist in a vacuum. You cannot treat electrification as just a standalone engineering challenge.
It's all connected.
It has to be heavily integrated with environmental regulations, water management policies, and localized economic planning.
It completely changes the metric for success. For decades, we've treated the physical plug in the wall as the finish line for global development. But if we know that electricity is fundamentally useless for poverty reduction, without the $500 milling machine or the irrigation pump that the farmer cannot afford,
Then the definition is flawed.
exactly.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, should the global community rewrite the definition of universal energy access entirely? Maybe an electrical connection shouldn't even count as access unless the machinery required to actually use it is included in the package.
That would change the entire development model.
It really would. Something to think about next time you flip a switch.